Hi, I'm Grace. Welcome to the sixth and final Shakespeare in Schools workshop. I know. Today we're going to talk about the Globe Theatre. There were a whole lot of theaters in Elizabethan London, but the Globe is special because the Globe is Shakespeare's theater. What does that mean? Did he own it? Did he build it? Is that the one that he wrote plays for? Let me explain. When Shakespeare came to London to become a playwright, he had to find a theater to work for. Just his luck, the most famous actor in London was creating a theater troupe around that same time. This famous actor's name was Richard Burbage, and he was mostly a famous actor because his father was a famous actor. You're not going to have to remember Richard Burbage's name for any of your history classes. I just want to talk about him because the story about the way the Globe was built is one of my favorites. Richard Burbage, his brother, and a bunch of his friends got together to create a theater company that they called the Lord Chamberlain's Men, named after their patron, or the guy who was giving them all the money to do plays, the Lord Chamberlain. Richard Burbage and the Lord Chamberlain's Men performed at a place creatively titled The Theatre. The theatre was Richard Burbage's dad's theatre, so when his dad died, the landlord of this place assumed that there would be no more theatre in his building. He didn't want theatre in his building, he was not excited that Richard was going to start a new theatre company, he wanted to kick everybody out. Why would somebody hate the theatre so much? Well, in Elizabethan era, theatres were places of ill repute. They were places where large crowds gathered, which was dangerous in Elizabethan London because, the plague tended to show up every few years. Theatres were used for immoral purposes like gambling and prostitution and bear baiting. I don't even want to tell you what that is. Theatres lured young apprentices away from their work, and they were full of ideas, like sword fighting is a great way to solve all your problems, and the king isn't always right, and the upper class and school teachers can be morons. Sorry, teachers. So this landlord was fed up. He was like, my building has been a theater for too long, I don't want it to be a theater anymore, all the theater people have to leave. And Richard Burbage was like, but I just started a theater company and this is my dad's place. You can't just take it from me. And the landlord was like, well, yes, I can. And then the landlord went on vacation, which was a dumb idea. Richard got together with his brother and looked over this lease and realized that there was a loophole. The landlord maybe owned the land that the building was built on, but their father built that building. Dang it! This lumber belongs to us! So they got some of their friends together, and late one night when the landlord was out of town, they showed up and took the theater apart. And then they walked all of the timber across the frozen river to the South Bank, where they built the Globe Theatre. It's just heartwarming to me to think of a whole bunch of actors heavily armed, marching through the streets of this city, carrying big beams of wood over their shoulders because it's their theater, dang it! Not much has changed. So in 1598, the Globe Theatre opened as the Playhouse of the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and Shakespeare was a shareholder. That just means that in order to get the theater company started, Shakespeare put a lot of his own money into it, which means he gets a bigger cut of the ticket sales. This is the place where Shakespeare started writing plays, and also he was an actor on the stage sometimes. He didn't write plays to read alone, he didn't write plays to be turned into movies, and he definitely didn't write plays to be studied in English class. Sorry, teachers. He wrote plays to be heard on this stage. This is what it looked like. Or so we think. It burned down in 1613, and then it was rebuilt and then torn down in 1664 when the Puritans took over and decided that nobody should have any fun. We only rebuilt it in the 1990s based on what we're pretty sure it must have looked like back in the day. Of course, we added things like fire exits and a sprinkler system. As you can see from this photo, it was open at the top to let daylight in. Here's a view of the modern building from Google Maps. You can see why Shakespeare called it a wooden O. And here's what it looks like from the inside. Take a good look at the stage, where the actors are, and the space where the audience watches the play. Right in front of the stage is standing room only, and as an audience member, you're so close to the actors that you can touch them. Those audience members are standing in the cheapest seats because you'd be in the direct afternoon sun, and maybe in the rain, and you'd have to stand. This is the portion of the audience referred to as the groundlings. Behind them and around them, there are tiers where more wealthy patrons can sit in the shade out of the rain. There's a roof over the stage, too, not necessarily to protect the actors, but to protect the costumes. So the way clothing was dyed in Elizabethan England meant that if you walked around in the rain, you wound up with big stains of dye on your skin, and you left colorful puddles behind. Only very rich people could afford to dye their clothing very dark anyway, and they could afford to stay out of the rain. Here's a sketch of what the Elizabethan Globe Theatre might have looked like. Real quick, I'd like you to jot down what you see here. Or, more importantly, jot down some ideas about what kind of things we use today to put on plays that the Elizabethans did not have. What do you see, and what's missing? Go ahead and pause, and think about it a little bit before we move on. Okay, let's first talk about what we see. There's the roof, or what they called the heavens, where props and things were stored, where sound effects came from, and we think you could even lower down an actor from there if you had an angel or a god in your play. This is also where the cannon was stored for war sound effects, which is what made the theater burn down in 1613. There's an upper stage where we can imagine Juliet on her balcony talking to Romeo on the stage below. You could also put musicians up there to provide a soundtrack for the play, or at least the music before and after the show. Also up here are the most expensive seats. Why would you want to sit up there behind the actors? Isn't that a terrible view of the play? Well, first of all, most people came to the theater to hear a play, not necessarily to watch every single thing going on the stage, unless it was a dance or a sword fight. And if you're one of those very rich nobles in your very dark clothing with all the feathers and buttons and lace, you want to go to the play so the groundlings can watch you watch the play. The yard is where the groundlings stand and cheer when the play is good and throw things at the actors when the play is bad. Underneath the stage was called hell. If the roof is heaven, then below the floor is hell. And actors could pop up through trapdoors. Usually the characters that came out from the floor were demons or witches or ghosts. Okay, so what didn't they have? Modern lighting. The daylight coming in through that big hole in the roof illuminated the actors and the audience. Have you ever seen a play where you were in light the entire time? It makes you be a part of the play. The audience coming to see Shakespeare's plays knew this ahead of time. They came to plays in order to participate, not to sit back in the dark and stay quiet. Don't look at me. Shh, there's a play. Modern sound equipment. All the music was live, and actors didn't have microphones, so they really needed to know how to project. The good news is, a round shape is really good for acoustics. Sets. They didn't really have huge set pieces. They had stools and chairs maybe, probably a throne, but in order to communicate place, they did it with costumes and props. And also, lines. Gee, it's cold out here on the battlements in Denmark. Have you seen any ghosts lately? I can't see you through all of this fog. There's so much fog on stage right now. Well, this is the Forest of Arden. If there's any observation that you made about the globe and I didn't address it, let me know in the comments section or in the discussion. I would love to talk about it. This is the space that Shakespeare wrote for, and that totally affected the way that he wrote his plays. Audiences were never left in the dark. So this concept that characters can be left alone on stage in order to contemplate to themselves and ask themselves questions is kind of new. Shakespeare's characters were never alone because they always had the audience to talk to. This type of storytelling, as far as I know, is really only found in outdoor theater today, which I encourage you to go and find for yourself, because it's a totally different experience than anything else. It's not like reading a book, it's not like watching a movie, it's not even like watching a regular modern play. I wish I could jump through the screen and demonstrate for you what it's like to be that close to the actors. But instead, I'll just roll this clip of Henry V, as it was performed on the Globe stage not too long ago.
With your mind.
Once more! Onto the breach, dear friends, once more! Or close the wall up with our English dead! In peace, there is nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility. But when the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action of the tiger! Stiffen the sinews. Summon up the blood, disguise fair nature with hard-favored rage, and then lend the eye a terrible aspect. Let it pry through the portage of the head like the brass cannon. Now set the teeth and stretch the nostril wide, hold hard the breath, and bend up every spirit to his full height. On! You noblest English, whose blood is fed from fathers of war-proof. Fathers are like so many Alexanders, have in these parts from morn till even fought and sheathed their swords for lack of argument. Dishonor not your mothers! Now attest that those of you called fathers did beget you. Be copy now to men of grosser blood and teach them how to war. And you, good yeoman, whose limbs were made in England, show us here the metal of your pasture. Let us swear that you are worth your breeding, which I doubt not. For there is none of you so mean and base that hath not noble lustre in your eyes. I see you stand like greyhounds in the slips, straining upon the start. The game is afoot. Follow your spirit, and upon this charge, cry, God for Harry! God for Harry! England! And St. George!
Oh, it's so much fun. If you're in the discussion section, I would love to hear from you about how the tools that you use to consume media, so your phone or your laptop or your television or your headphones, change the way you feel about what you're listening to or what you're watching. There's a lot to say about that right now since we moved from in-person classrooms to online learning. Speaking of, it's time for us to end the last lesson in the Shakespeare in Schools workshop series, but you haven't heard the last from us. Let me know if there's anything I can do to further supplement your classroom. Let your teacher or your librarian or your club organizer know that you can sign up for a discussion section. It's totally free. I'll just send you a Flipgrid link, and then you can talk to me. And with that, thanks so much for watching. Say goodnight, Yorick.